The arrogant millionaire CEO mocked his assistant's looks until he saw her at the pool and lost it. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. Some people are born to be noticed, others learn to disappear. Amara Dixon adjusted her black blazer for the third time in 5 minutes, standing outside the glass conference room on the 32nd floor of Domus Tech's corporate tower in downtown San Francisco. Through the transparent walls, she could see the Monday morning ritual unfolding. 20 executives in expensive suits gesturing at holographic displays, their voices muffled, but their energy unmistakable. She clutched her tablet closer to her chest, checking the time. 8:47 a.m. 3 minutes until the quarterly review meeting that would determine the next 6 months of her carefully orchestrated life. At 26, Amara had mastered the art of professional invisibility. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect low bun, not a strand out of place. Her navy suit was impeccable but unremarkable. Her makeup was subtle, designed to enhance without drawing attention. She had learned through years of navigating corporate America as a young black woman that competence spoke louder when it didn't have to compete with assumptions about her appearance. The conference room door slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss, and Damian Royce stepped out. Even from 10 feet away, his presence filled the hallway. 6'2", broad shoulders that his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit couldn't hide, and the kind of confident stride that suggested he owned not just the building, but probably the entire city block. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, and his grey eyes held the calculating coldness of someone who had never heard the word no and meant it. Ms. Dixon. His voice was crisp, professional, with just enough California warmth to avoid sounding completely robotic. The Peterson projections, already uploaded to the central drive, Mr. Royce, color-coded by priority level, with footnotes for the anomalies in the third quarter data. Amara's voice was steady, measured. She had practiced this tone in her bathroom mirror until it became second nature. Damian's eyes flicked over her briefly, a scan that lasted maybe 2 seconds before returning to his phone. And the Henderson file? Reorganized according to your specifications. The environmental impact studies are now cross-referenced with the cost analysis reports. Good. He was already walking away, his attention absorbed by whatever crisis was unfolding on his screen. Amara watched him disappear into the conference room, where he was immediately surrounded by a cluster of vice presidents and department heads. Through the glass, she could see them laughing at something he said, their faces animated with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for people who signed their paychecks. She pressed her lips together and walked to her desk, a neat workstation positioned strategically outside Damian's corner office, close enough to be summoned at a moment's notice, far enough to remain in the background of his daily existence. The morning passed in its usual rhythm, phone calls routed and filtered, emails sorted and prioritized, meetings scheduled and rescheduled with the precision of air traffic control. Amara moved through her tasks with mechanical efficiency, her mind focused on the endless stream of details that kept Damian's world running smoothly. At 11:30, her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Keisha. "Coffee? I need to hear about the disaster date from Saturday." Amara smiled despite herself and typed back, "Can't. Big meeting at 2. Rain check? You work too hard, girl. That man doesn't even know your name half the time." The message stung because it was true. For 18 months, Amara had been Damian's executive assistant, handling everything from his travel arrangements to his dry cleaning pickups. She knew he took his coffee black with 1 sugar cube, never a packet. She knew he was allergic to shellfish, but always forgot to mention it at business dinners. She knew he called his mother every Sunday at exactly 3 p.m. Pacific time, but to him, she was furniture, functional, reliable, forgettable furniture. The conference room began to empty around 1:45, executives filing out with the satisfied expressions of people who had just approved millions in quarterly spending. Amara stood up automatically, straightening her skirt and preparing for the post-meeting debrief that always followed. Damian emerged last, flanked by Harrison Webb, the head of marketing, and 2 other department heads whose names Amara filed away without effort. They were discussing the Peterson acquisition when Harrison noticed her approaching. "Ah, the lovely Ms. Dixon. How do you manage to keep our fearless leader organized? I can barely handle my own calendar." Damian's response was so quiet that Amara almost missed it. Almost. "Well, it helps when you don't have to worry about distractions." The words hit her like ice water, not loud enough for the others to hear, but clear enough that there was no mistaking their meaning. Harrison and the other executives continued their conversation, oblivious, but Amara felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. She maintained her professional smile, nodded politely, and watched them walk away. But as Damien disappeared around the corner, laughing at something Harrison had said, Amara Dixon made herself a promise. She would never let him make her feel invisible again. Have you ever been treated as invisible by someone who should value you the most? What would you do if your boss made you feel worthless with just one cruel comment? Would you fight back or disappear forever? The worst wounds are the ones nobody else can see. Amara stared at her reflection in the ladies' room mirror, her hands gripping the marble countertop until her knuckles turned white. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under her eyes, making her look older, more tired than her 26 years should allow. It helps when you don't have to worry about distractions. The words echoed in her mind like a broken record. She had replayed the moment a dozen times, analyzing Damien's tone, the casual cruelty in his voice, the way he hadn't even bothered to lower it enough to spare her feelings. She straightened her shoulders and smoothed down her blazer. Professional armor, her grandmother used to call it. Put on your armor, baby girl, and let the world see your strength, not your scars. The bathroom door opened behind her, and Vivian Chang from HR walked in, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor. Amara, perfect timing. I was just coming to find you. Vivian's smile was bright, genuine. Unlike most of the executives, she actually seemed to see Amara as a person rather than office equipment. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee is meeting next week. We'd love to have your input on the new mentorship program. Of course. Amara's voice was steady, professional. Send me the details, and I'll review them before the meeting. You know, you should really consider applying for the communications coordinator position that's opening up. Your organizational skills are incredible, and honestly, you're wasted as an assistant. For a moment, something flickered across Amara's face. Hope, maybe, or determination. I'll think about it. As Vivian left, Amara looked at herself once more in the mirror. Maybe it was time to stop thinking and start acting. The afternoon passed differently than usual. Amara still answered every phone call, still organized every meeting, still anticipated Damien's needs before he voiced them. But something had shifted in the atmosphere around her desk. She no longer jumped to attention when he walked by. She didn't offer the small, polite smiles that had become automatic over 18 months. Her responses were shorter, more clinical, still professional, still flawless, but stripped of the warmth that had once softened her efficiency. At 4:15 p.m., Damien emerged from his office with a stack of contracts. Ms. Dixon, I need these reviewed and already done. Amara didn't look up from her computer screen. I anticipated you'd need them for tomorrow's client meeting. They're on your desk with recommended revisions highlighted in blue. Damien paused, seemingly thrown by her interruption. The Morrison account presentation, uploaded to the client portal an hour ago. Mr. Morrison's assistant confirmed receipt and scheduled the follow-up call for Thursday at 10 a.m. And the quarterly budget reports are compiled and waiting for your approval. The environmental compliance documents for the Henderson project are filed and cross-referenced. Your dinner reservation for tonight has been moved to 8 p.m. instead of 7:30 because traffic on the bridge is heavy due to construction. For the first time in 18 months, Damien actually stopped and looked at her. Really looked. Amara's fingers never paused on her keyboard. Her posture remained perfectly straight, but there was something different about her energy, a distance that hadn't been there before. Is everything all right, Ms. Dixon? The question surprised them both. Amara's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their rhythm. Everything is fine, Mr. Royce. Was there something else you needed? Her tone was polite, correct, and completely impersonal. It was the voice she used with difficult clients and overly persistent vendors. Damien had never heard her use it with him. No, that's all. He turned to go back to his office, then stopped. Actually, there is one thing. Harrison mentioned that you've been here longer than any assistant I've had. 18 months is impressive. Amara finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting his grey ones for the first time that day. Is that a question, Mr. Royce? It's an observation. I see. She returned to her screen. Well, consistency is part of my job description. Damien stood there for another moment, feeling oddly off balance. Something was wrong with this conversation, but he couldn't quite identify what. Amara was doing everything perfectly, saying all the right things, maintaining complete professionalism, but it felt like talking to a beautiful, efficient robot. Right, well, Good work. As he walked back to his office, Damien found himself glancing over his shoulder. Amara was already back to work, her focus absolute, her expression neutral, but for some reason, the sight bothered him more than he cared to admit. That evening, Amara sat in her small apartment in Oakland, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands as she stared out at the Bay Bridge lights. Her laptop was open on the coffee table, the communications coordinator job description glowing on the screen. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "How was the day from hell?" Amara typed back, "Different. I think I'm done being invisible." Finally, what changed? Amara stared at the screen for a long moment before typing, "I remembered who I am when nobody's watching." She closed the laptop, picked up her phone, and began composing an email to Vivienne Chang about the communications position. For the first time in months, Amara Dixon smiled, but it wasn't the polite professional smile she wore at the office. It was the smile of a woman who had just remembered her own power. Sometimes the most dangerous moment is when you realize what you've been taking for granted. Damien Royce had always prided himself on reading people. It was a skill that had served him well through Harvard Business School, 3 successful acquisitions, and countless boardroom negotiations. But as he stood at his office window watching the morning fog roll across San Francisco Bay, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. 3 days had passed since his conversation with Amara, and each day had been different. Not wrong, exactly. Her work remained flawless. His calendar was still managed with military precision. His coffee still appeared on his desk at exactly 8:30 a.m., black with 1 sugar cube. But the woman delivering it felt like a stranger. "Mr. Royce?" Amara's voice came from behind him, professional and distant. "Your 9 a.m. is here. Ms. Hartwell from the Seattle office." Damien turned around and once again felt that odd sense of displacement. Amara stood in his doorway, tablet in hand, posture perfect, but there was something in her expression, or maybe the absence of something, that made him pause. "Thank you. And Ms. Dixon?" She waited, her dark eyes meeting his without the slight deference he had grown accustomed to. "The Henderson environmental reports. I noticed some discrepancies in the third-quarter projections. I caught those yesterday. The corrected versions are already in your inbox, cross-referenced with the EPA compliance standards. Ms. Hartwell is waiting." Her tone was crisp, final, a conversation ender rather than an invitation for further discussion. Damien found himself nodding, then walking past her toward the conference room, catching a hint of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that he'd never noticed before. The meeting with Lindsay Hartwell dragged longer than expected. As the Seattle regional director droned on about market penetration strategies, Damien's attention kept drifting to the glass wall that separated the conference room from the main office floor. He could see Amara at her desk, fielding phone calls with the same smooth efficiency she'd always possessed. But watching her now, he noticed things he'd somehow missed before, the way she tilted her head slightly when listening to complicated requests, the graceful movement of her hands as she took notes, the small smile that appeared when she was helping someone solve a problem. When had she become so composed, so self-contained? "Damien," Lindsay's voice cut through his distraction. "The Q4 projections?" "Right, yes." He forced himself to focus, but his eyes kept wandering back to that glass wall. After Lindsay left, Damien returned to his office to find his afternoon schedule rearranged with typical precision. But instead of the handwritten notes Amara usually left explaining the changes, there was simply a printed email summary. Efficient, but impersonal. He pressed the intercom button. "Ms. Dixon, could you come in for a moment?" "Of course." She appeared in his doorway within 30 seconds, tablet ready, expression neutral. Professional armor, he found himself thinking, though he wasn't sure where the phrase had come from. "The Morrison presentation went well," he said, settling behind his desk. "Your preparation made the difference. I'm glad to hear that." The response was correct, appropriate, but it lacked the small spark of pride he'd grown used to seeing when he acknowledged her work. Instead, she simply waited, as if his praise was just another item to be noted and filed away. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "Is this regarding a specific project, Mr. Royce? I have the quarterly expense reports to finalize before—" "Sit down, Amara." Her first name felt strange on his tongue. In 18 months, he'd always used her title, maintaining the professional distance that kept their working relationship clean and uncomplicated. But something about this moment called for a different approach. Amara hesitated for just a fraction of a second before taking the chair, crossing her legs and settling her hands in her lap with practiced grace. "I've been thinking about what Harrison said the other day, about how long you've been here." Damien leaned back in his chair, studying her face. 18 months is unusual. Most assistants use this position as a stepping stone. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all. I'm curious about your long-term goals, your career aspirations." For the first time in days, something flickered across Amara's expression. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Royce, but I'm quite content in my current role." "Are you?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Amara's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her tablet, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, I am. Because if you're interested in expanding your responsibilities, taking on more strategic work..." He paused, not quite sure why he was having this conversation. "There might be opportunities, such as the communications coordinator position. Vivian mentioned you'd be a strong candidate." Amara's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a straightening, as if she was preparing for battle. "I wasn't aware you discussed your staff with HR. I don't, usually. But your name came up in the context of the diversity initiative and..." He trailed off, realizing he was explaining himself to his assistant. When had that started happening? "I see." Amara stood up, smoothing down her skirt. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Royce? The quarterly reports won't finish themselves." Damien watched her move toward the door, frustrated by the conversation's abrupt end and his own inability to articulate what he was really trying to say. "Amara." She stopped, turned back to face him. "Yes? Nothing, that's all." After she left, Damien sat alone in his office, staring at the door she'd closed behind her. For the first time in his professional life, he felt like he'd lost control of a conversation with a subordinate, and for reasons he couldn't quite name, that bothered him more than any failed deal or missed deadline ever had. That evening, Amara sat in her favorite coffee shop in Berkeley, laptop open, updating her resume for the first time in 2 years. Across from her, Keisha nursed a cappuccino and watched her friend with growing excitement. "I can't believe you're actually doing this," Keisha said. "It's about time you stopped letting that man treat you like office furniture." "He doesn't treat me like furniture," Amara replied automatically, then paused. "Or maybe he does. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore." "Girl, you've been invisible so long you forgot you could be seen." Amara looked up from her laptop, meeting her best friend's knowing gaze. "What if I'm not ready to be seen? What if you're more ready than you think?" Outside the window, the Berkeley campus was alive with students heading to evening classes, their voices mixing with the hum of traffic and the distant sound of a street musician's guitar. Normal people living normal lives, pursuing normal dreams. Amara saved her resume, closed the laptop, and smiled. Tomorrow, she would submit her application for the communications coordinator position. And for the first time in 18 months, she wouldn't ask Damien Royce for permission. The moment you stop asking for permission is the moment you start taking control. Vivian Chang's email arrived at 7:42 a.m. on a Thursday morning, just as Amara was settling into her desk with her usual cup of Earl Grey tea. The subject line was simple: Communications Coordinator Application, Next Steps. Amara's heart stuttered for just a moment before she clicked open the message. "Dear Amara, thank you for your comprehensive application. I'm impressed by your qualifications and would like to schedule an interview for next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Please confirm your availability. Looking forward to our conversation. Best regards, Vivian." She read the email twice, then closed her laptop and took a slow, steadying breath. 18 months of invisible efficiency, of anticipating needs and managing crises, of being the perfect assistant. And now, for the first time, she was stepping out from behind the curtain. The elevator chimed softly as Damien arrived, earlier than usual. Amara could see him through the glass walls, moving with his characteristic purposeful stride. But today, something seemed different about his energy. More tense, maybe. More aware. "Good morning, Mr. Royce," she said as he approached her desk. "Your 9 a.m. with the Portland team has been moved to 9:30. The Henderson compliance documents came back from legal with minor revisions, and I've already incorporated them into the final proposal." Damien paused beside her desk, his grey eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her suddenly conscious of her heartbeat. "You're efficient as always," he said, but his tone was oddly flat. "Anything else I should know about?" For a split second, Amara considered mentioning the interview. Professional courtesy would dictate giving her supervisor advance notice, but something held her back. Maybe the memory of his casual cruelty, maybe the growing sense of her own worth. "Nothing that can't wait until after your morning meetings," she replied smoothly. The morning passed in its usual rhythm, but underneath the professional calm, Amara could feel something building. Damien emerged from his 9:30 meeting, looking more agitated than usual, and his 10:45 conference call with the board seemed to leave him even more on edge. At 11:15, her phone rang. "Ms. Dixon, this is Vivienne Chang. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I wanted to discuss a few details about Wednesday's interview." "Of course," Amara said, lowering her voice slightly and turning away from the main office floor. "What can I help you with? I've been reviewing your file, and I have to say your performance metrics are exceptional. The department heads I've spoken with have nothing but praise for your work. There's just one formality we need to address." Amara's stomach tightened. "Which is?" "We'll need a reference from your current supervisor. Standard procedure for internal transfers. I assume Mr. Royce is aware of your application." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Through the glass wall of Damien's office, Amara could see him on another call, his expression dark as he gestured at whatever crisis was unfolding on his screen. "I plan to inform him after the initial interview," Amara said carefully. "I wanted to ensure I was a serious candidate before involving him in the process." "I understand the delicacy of the situation," Vivienne replied, her voice warm with understanding. "But I'm afraid we can't move forward without his input. It's company policy." After hanging up, Amara sat at her desk staring at the closed door of Damien's office. For 18 months, she had been the perfect employee, anticipating his needs, managing his schedule, solving his problems before he even knew they existed. And now she was about to tell him she wanted to leave. The opportunity came at 2:30 p.m., during the brief lull between Damien's lunch meeting and his 3 p.m. client call. Amara knocked on his doorframe, tablet in hand, maintaining the professional demeanor that had become her shield. "Mr. Royce, do you have a moment?" He looked up from his computer, and she noticed the tension around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried stress like a physical weight. "What is it?" "I need to inform you that I've applied for the communications coordinator position. HR will be contacting you for a reference." The words came out calmly, professionally, but the effect on Damien was immediate and startling. His expression shifted from distracted annoyance to something sharper, more focused. "You applied for the communications position?" "Yes." "When?" "Yesterday." Damien leaned back in his chair, his grey eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to step backward, but she held her ground, meeting his gaze with quiet determination. "And you didn't think to discuss this with me first?" "It's an internal application. I wasn't aware I needed your permission to advance my career." The response was perfectly reasonable, perfectly professional, but something in Damien's expression suggested he found it anything but reasonable. "Permission, no. Professional courtesy, yes." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the edge underneath. "We've worked together for 18 months, Amara. I thought that warranted some level of communication." "Like the communication you showed when you made that comment about distractions?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, quiet but unmistakably pointed. Damien's face went very still. "What comment?" "You know exactly what comment." For a long moment they stared at each other across the expanse of his desk. The afternoon light streaming through his windows cast shadows across his face, making his expression difficult to read. But Amara could see something working in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "I see," he said finally. "And this application is your response to that comment?" "This application is my response to 18 months of being treated as if I were invisible." Amara's voice remained steady, but something in her posture had shifted. Straighter, more commanding. "I'm very good at my job, Mr. Royce, but I'm capable of much more than managing your calendar and screening your calls." "I'm aware of your capabilities." "Are you? Because in 18 months you've never once asked about my goals, my interests, my qualifications, beyond my ability to anticipate your coffee preferences." She paused, letting the words settle between them. "Until 3 days ago, when you suddenly became concerned about my career aspirations." Damien stood up abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the city. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, more controlled. The communications position would be a significant change. Different responsibilities, different reporting structure. You'd be working directly with the executive team. "I'm looking forward to the challenge. And if you get the position, your replacement here would need considerable training. It could take months to find someone with your specific skill set." Amara felt a flicker of something. Triumph, maybe, or vindication. For the first time in 18 months, Damien Royce was acknowledging that losing her would be difficult. "I'm confident you'll manage," she said. "You're quite capable when you need to be." He turned from the window to face her, and for a moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with professional hierarchy or workplace politics. Something raw and unspoken that made Amara's breath catch in her throat. "I'll speak with Vivian," he said finally. "Provide the reference." "Thank you." But Amara, he waited until she met his eyes. "This conversation isn't over." As she walked back to her desk, Amara's hands were trembling slightly, but for the first time in 18 months, they weren't trembling from fear or humiliation. They were trembling from power. Sometimes the most dangerous journeys are the ones that take you away from everything familiar. Damien Royce had never been one to second-guess his decisions. 20 years of corporate success had been built on quick thinking, decisive action, and the unwavering confidence that he was always the smartest person in the room. But as he sat in his office on Friday afternoon, reviewing the logistics for the quarterly executive retreat, doubt crept through his mind like fog through the Golden Gate. 3 days had passed since Amara's bombshell announcement about the communications position. 3 days of watching her move through her duties with the same flawless efficiency, but with an energy that felt fundamentally different. She was no longer his assistant, who happened to be a capable woman. She was a capable woman, who happened to be working as his assistant. The distinction was more unsettling than he cared to admit. "Mr. Royce?" Amara's voice came through the intercom, crisp and professional. "Ms. Chang is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but says it's regarding a staffing matter." Damien's jaw tightened. He had a good idea what this was about. "Send her in." Vivian entered with her usual warm efficiency, but her expression was more serious than usual. She settled into the chair across from his desk, with the careful posture of someone about to deliver news that might not be well received. "I wanted to discuss Amara Dixon's application personally," she began without preamble. "Her qualifications are exceptional, and the interview went extremely well, but I need to understand your perspective before we move forward." "My perspective?" "Damien, let's be honest. Amara has been your right hand for 18 months. Losing her would be significant. If you have concerns about the timing or if there are projects that require her specific expertise." Damien found himself studying Vivian's face, looking for subtext. "Are you asking me to block her promotion?" "I'm asking for your honest assessment of whether this transition would be in the company's best interest." The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Damien could feel the weight of his response, the power he held over Amara's future, with a few carefully chosen words. 6 months ago, he might not have hesitated. Amara was invaluable in her current role, and replacing her would be a massive headache. But 6 months ago, he hadn't seen the way her eyes flashed when she stood up for herself. 6 months ago, he hadn't felt the strange electricity that now seemed to fill the air whenever they were in the same room. "She's qualified," he said finally. "More than qualified. The communications department would be lucky to have her." Vivian's eyebrows rose slightly. "And the transition? Finding a replacement? That's my problem to solve, not hers." After Vivian left, Damien sat alone with the growing realization that he had just cleared the path for Amara to leave his immediate orbit. The thought should have felt like a relief, one less complication in his carefully ordered world. Instead, it felt like loss. The executive retreat was held at Silver Point Lodge, a luxury resort nestled in the hills of Sonoma County, 2 hours north of San Francisco. The property boasted panoramic views of rolling vineyards, world-class dining, and enough amenities to keep 30 executives entertained for a long weekend of strategic planning and team building. Amara had coordinated every detail of the retreat with her usual precision. Transportation, accommodations, meeting schedules, dietary restrictions, all managed seamlessly. But as she walked through the lodge's main building on Friday evening, checking final preparations, she felt an unfamiliar flutter of nervousness. This would be her last retreat as Damien's assistant. Vivienne had called that afternoon to formally offer her the communications position, with a start date 2 weeks from Monday. In 48 hours, she would return to San Francisco as a different person professionally. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Ms. Dixon," Harrison Webb's voice boomed across the lobby. "You've outdone yourself. This place is magnificent." Amara smiled, accepting the compliment with grace. "I'm glad you approve. The welcome reception starts in 30 minutes, followed by dinner on the terrace." "Perfect, and please enjoy yourself this weekend. You've earned it." As Harrison walked away, Amara caught sight of Damien emerging from the registration desk. He had changed from his usual business attire into dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look younger, more approachable. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded lobby, and she felt that now familiar jolt of awareness that had been growing stronger since their confrontation in his office. He started toward her but was immediately intercepted by two board members with questions about the quarterly projections. Amara watched him shift into CEO mode, confident, commanding, completely in his element. But she also noticed something new in his manner, a restlessness maybe, a distraction that hadn't been there before. The welcome reception was held on the lodge's main terrace, with string lights creating a warm glow over the assembled executives. Amara moved through the crowd with practiced ease, ensuring everyone had drinks, making introductions, solving small problems before they became large ones. But she was hyper-aware of Damien's presence, even when he was on the other side of the terrace. She could feel his attention like heat on her skin, though every time she looked his way, he seemed to be deep in conversation with someone else. "You look different tonight," a voice said behind her. Amara turned to find Dr. Marcus Sterling, the company's chief technology officer, holding 2 glasses of wine. He was a few years older than Damien, with graying temples and an easy smile that had made him popular with both staff and clients. "Different how?" she asked, accepting the wine with a polite smile. "More present, I suppose. Usually at these events you're so focused on managing details that you seem to disappear into the background. Tonight you seem—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Visible." The observation was more perceptive than she had expected from Marcus, who had always struck her as pleasant but somewhat oblivious to interpersonal dynamics. "Maybe I'm just feeling more relaxed," she said. "Well, whatever it is, it suits you." Marcus raised his glass in a small toast. To successful retreats and new beginnings. As they clinked glasses, Amara noticed Damien watching them from across the terrace. His expression was neutral, but something in his posture suggested focused attention. "Tell me," Marcus continued, "are you planning to swim tomorrow? The lodge pool is supposed to be spectacular." "I might," Amara replied, though she hadn't really considered it. "Are you?" "Definitely. I heard several people talking about an impromptu pool party after tomorrow's meetings. You should join us." The conversation was casual, friendly, but Amara found herself glancing toward Damien again. He was still watching, though he was now nodding at whatever the CFO was telling him. "I'll think about it," she said. As the evening wore on, Amara felt herself beginning to relax for the first time in weeks. The wine, the warm air, the knowledge that she would soon be free from the complicated dynamics of her current position, all of it combined to create a sense of lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Around 11 p.m., as the reception was winding down, she found herself alone on the terrace, looking out over the moonlit vineyards. The string lights cast dancing shadows on the stone floor, and the sound of laughter from the main lodge created a backdrop of contentment. "Beautiful night," Damien's voice came from behind her, low and unexpected. She turned to find him standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his expression more open than she had seen it in, possibly ever. "It is," she agreed, suddenly conscious of her heartbeat. "You've done excellent work organizing this weekend, as always." "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them charged with unspoken words. Finally, Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could catch the scent of his cologne. "Amara," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, less formal, more personal. "About the communications position. Congratulations are in order. Vivienne called this afternoon." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "I want you to know that my recommendation was completely honest. You deserve this opportunity." "Thank you," she managed. "But I also want you to know that—" He paused, seeming to struggle with whatever he was trying to say. "Things will be different without you." Before she could respond, the terrace door opened, and Harrison Webb appeared, slightly unsteady from wine and laughter. "There you are, Damien. We're debating whether to raid the kitchen for a midnight snack. Your vote is needed to settle a very serious disagreement about cheese selection." The moment shattered, and Damien stepped back, his professional mask sliding into place. "Of course," he said. "Lead the way." As he walked toward the lodge, he glanced back at Amara once. In the soft light of the string lamps, his expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes looked almost like regret. Sometimes a single moment can shatter everything you thought you knew about yourself. Saturday's strategic sessions had gone exactly as planned. 3 hours of quarterly reviews, followed by team-building exercises that had somehow managed to be both productive and entertaining. By 5 p.m., the executives were free to enjoy the lodge's amenities before the evening's wine tasting and dinner. Damien stood on the main terrace, discussing supply chain optimization with 2 board members, but his concentration kept fracturing. Throughout the day, he had found himself stealing glances at Amara as she moved seamlessly between her duties, ensuring every detail of the retreat ran smoothly. But there was something different about her today. A lightness in her step, a brightness in her smile when she interacted with other attendees. It was the energy of someone who was already halfway out the door. The Henderson project numbers look solid, board member Patricia Kellaway was saying, but I'm concerned about the environmental compliance timeline. Damien nodded and made appropriate responses, but his attention drifted when he heard Amara's laugh, genuine, musical, coming from somewhere near the lodge entrance. She was talking with Marcus Sterling and 2 other executives, her posture relaxed in a way he had never seen during working hours. Damien? Patricia's voice cut through his distraction. The EPA requirements? Right, yes, we're well within the guidelines. Amara, Ms. Dixon, has been coordinating with legal to ensure full compliance. As if summoned by his words, Amara appeared at his elbow, with her usual quiet efficiency. Mr. Royce? The wine tasting has been moved to 7 p.m. to accommodate the kitchen's dinner preparation schedule. I've updated everyone individually, but wanted to confirm you received the message. Thank you. He turned to Patricia and the other board member. Ms. Dixon is our new communications coordinator. This will be her last retreat in an assistant capacity. Patricia smiled warmly. Congratulations, dear. Well deserved, I'm sure. Thank you, Ms. Kellaway. Amara's professional smile was perfect, but Damien noticed she didn't look at him as she spoke. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the dinner arrangements. As she walked away, Patricia watched her go with an appraising look. Smart move, promoting her. That woman could run a small country with the right resources. Yes, Damien replied, though the word felt hollow. She could. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant toward evening when Damien finally escaped the last of the day's meetings. His plan was simple: retreat to his room, review some quarterly projections, maybe call his mother as he did every Saturday. Routine, familiar, uncomplicated. But as he walked past the lodge's main windows, something made him stop. The pool area was visible from the second-floor corridor, and he could see several executives enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. Harrison Webb was holding court near the Poolside bar, gesturing animatedly with a cocktail in hand. Marcus Sterling was in the water, doing leisurely laps. A few others were scattered around on lounge chairs, tablets and drinks in hand. And then Damien's world tilted on its axis. Amara emerged from the changing room. She wore a simple black one-piece swimsuit, elegant, sophisticated, nothing remotely inappropriate. But the effect on Damien was immediate and devastating. For 18 months he had seen her in conservative business attire that concealed rather than revealed. Now, for the first time, he could see the graceful lines of her shoulders, the curve of her waist, the long, athletic length of her legs. Her hair, usually pulled back in a perfect chignon, fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Without makeup, her natural beauty was even more striking, the warm brown of her skin seeming to glow in the golden afternoon light. She moved with unconscious grace toward the pool, completely unaware that 30 feet above her, Damien Royce was having what could only be described as an existential crisis. How had he never noticed? How had 18 months of daily interaction somehow failed to register that his assistant was... The word that came to mind was breathtaking, and it hit him like a physical blow. Marcus Sterling reached the pool's edge just as Amara approached, pulling himself out of the water with an easy athleticism that made Damien's jaw clench. Water dripped from Marcus's chest as he smiled at Amara, offering her his hand as she descended the pool steps. "The water's perfect," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "Almost as perfect as the company." Amara laughed, a sound that sent an unexpected jolt through Damien's chest. "You're shameless, Marcus." Only when inspired. She slipped into the water with fluid grace, and Damien watched Marcus's eyes follow the movement with obvious appreciation. When she surfaced, her hair slicked back and her face bright with laughter, Marcus moved closer under the pretense of continuing their conversation. Something dark and unfamiliar twisted in Damien's gut. Jealousy, he realized with shock. He was jealous of Marcus Sterling, a man he had worked with for 5 years without a hint of competitive feeling. But as he watched Marcus lean closer to Amara, sharing some joke that made her throw her head back in delight, Damien felt a possessiveness so fierce it left him breathless. She was his assistant. She worked for him. She anticipated his needs, managed his schedule, made his professional life seamless and successful. For 18 months, she had been his. Except she had never been his at all. The realization hit him with devastating clarity. Amara Dixon was a brilliant, beautiful, accomplished woman who happened to work as his assistant, and in 2 weeks, she would be working somewhere else, for someone else, building a career that had nothing to do with him. The thought was unbearable. Harrison Webb appeared poolside with drinks, joining Marcus and Amara in easy conversation. Soon they were joined by 2 more executives, and suddenly Amara was the center of a small, animated group. She was clearly enjoying herself, relaxed in a way Damien had never witnessed, and the men around her were obviously captivated. Why wouldn't they be? She was intelligent, funny, gorgeous, and completely unattached. Damien felt like he was seeing her for the first time, and the effect was seismic. He gripped the window frame, his knuckles white with tension, as Marcus said something that made Amara laugh again. When Marcus's hand briefly touched her shoulder as he spoke, Damien actually took a step toward the window, as if he could somehow intervene from 30 feet away. This was insane. He was losing his mind over an employee, over his assistant, over a woman who clearly wanted nothing more than to escape his orbit as quickly as possible. But as he watched Amara smile at something Harrison said, as he saw her push wet hair away from her face with unconscious sensuality, as he witnessed the easy way she interacted with his colleagues as an equal, not a subordinate, Damien finally understood what had been building in him for days. He wanted her, not just physically, though the attraction was now undeniable. He wanted her attention, her sharp intelligence, her quiet strength. He wanted the woman who had stood up to him in his office, who had applied for a promotion without asking his permission, who was brave enough to demand the respect she deserved. He wanted Amara Dixon, and he was about to lose her forever. As the group in the pool began to break up for dinner preparations, Damien turned away from the window and walked unsteadily toward his room. His hands were shaking, actually shaking, as he tried to process what had just happened to him. For the first time in his adult life, Damien Royce was completely, utterly, helplessly in love, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The most dangerous revelations are the ones that change everything you thought you knew about yourself. Damien stood in his hotel room, staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. His hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, his shirt wrinkled from the nervous tension that had gripped his body for the past hour. He looked like a man who had just been hit by a freight train, which in a way he had. The wine tasting was supposed to start in 20 minutes. As CEO, his presence was not just expected, but essential. But the thought of walking downstairs, of making small talk and discussing quarterly projections while Amara moved through the crowd in whatever elegant dress she had chosen for the evening, made his chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to panic. He had built his entire adult life on control. Control over his emotions, his reactions, his business relationships. He was Damien Royce, Harvard MBA, Fortune 500 CEO, the man who never let personal feelings interfere with professional judgment. And now, he was falling apart because his assistant looked beautiful in a swimsuit. No, that wasn't right, and he knew it. This wasn't about physical attraction, though God knew that was devastating enough. This was about 18 months of watching Amara Dixon demonstrate grace under pressure, intelligence in crisis, and quiet strength in the face of his own occasional arrogance. This was about finally seeing her as she really was, not as his assistant, but as an extraordinary woman who had been hiding in plain sight. A knock at his door interrupted his spiral of self-recrimination. "Damien, you in there?" Harrison Webb's voice, slightly slurred from whatever he had been drinking at the pool. Damien straightened his shirt, ran a hand through his hair and opened the door. "Harrison, what's up?" "Wine tasting starting soon. Thought you might want to walk down together." Harrison's eyes were bright with alcohol and gossip. "Have to say, this has been one hell of a retreat. Did you see Dixon at the pool earlier?" Every muscle in Damien's body went rigid. "What about her?" "Man, I've worked with that woman for 2 years and never realized." Harrison whistled low. Marcus Sterling certainly noticed. Guy could barely keep his eyes off her. Smart move on her part, though, getting promoted out of assistant work. Woman like that deserves to be more than someone's secretary. The casual observation hit Damien like a physical blow, because Harrison was right. Amara did deserve more than to spend her days managing someone else's calendar, no matter how important that someone might be. "We should head downstairs," Damien managed. The wine tasting was held in the lodge's private tasting room, an intimate space with exposed wooden beams and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the vineyard. Soft jazz played in the background as 30 executives sampled selections from the resort's award-winning collection. Damien spotted Amara immediately. She wore a midnight blue dress that skimmed her knees, her hair loosely pinned up with a few tendrils framing her face. She was talking with Vivian Chang and 2 other department heads, wineglass in hand, looking completely at ease. For 18 months, he had seen her in corporate armor, structured blazers, conservative skirts, professional shields that kept the world at a respectful distance. Tonight she looked like herself, relaxed, confident, radiantly beautiful, and completely out of his reach. "Damien," Patricia Kellaway appeared at his elbow with her usual commanding presence. "There you are. I was just telling Vivian what an excellent choice the Dixon promotion is. That woman has executive presence in spades." Damien accepted a glass of wine from a passing server, grateful for something to do with his hands. "She's very capable." "Capable?" Patricia laughed. "Damien, she's extraordinary. Do you know she speaks 3 languages, has an MBA from Berkeley, managed event logistics for tech conferences before joining Domus? I had quite the conversation with her earlier." Each revelation felt like another weight added to Damien's chest. 3 languages, an MBA, event management experience. How much about Amara Dixon had he never bothered to learn? Across the room, Marcus Sterling approached Amara's group, and Damien watched her face light up with genuine pleasure at seeing him. They fell into easy conversation, Marcus leaning slightly closer to hear her over the background music. "You know," Patricia continued, oblivious to Damien's growing distress, "I wouldn't be surprised if that young woman ends up running her own company someday. She has that kind of vision." The thought of Amara building a career that had nothing to do with him, of her success story becoming completely separate from his, made something twist painfully in Damien's chest. "Excuse me," he muttered to Patricia, and walked toward the bar. But he couldn't escape the sound of Amara's laughter, or the sight of Marcus Sterling hanging on her every word. Dinner was torture. Amara was seated 4 places down from Damien at the long table, positioned between Marcus and Harrison Webb. From his vantage point, Damien could see her animated conversations, her easy laughter, the way she gestured gracefully as she told some story that had both men completely captivated. She belonged here, he realized with startling clarity. Not as his assistant, managing details in the background, but as an equal participant in these conversations. She was smart enough, accomplished enough, confident enough to hold her own with any executive in the room. How had he never seen it before? "Earth to Damien," came a voice beside him. Dr. Claudia Reeves, the company's chief financial officer, was looking at him with amusement. "You've been staring at your salmon for 10 minutes without taking a bite." "Sorry, just thinking about the Morrison projections." "On a Saturday night? During the best dinner we've had all year?" Claudia followed his gaze down the table, and her expression shifted to something more knowing. "Ah, I see. The projections." Damien felt heat rise up his neck. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all. Just that it's nice to see you finally noticing what the rest of us have known for months." "Which is?" "That Amara Dixon is remarkable. And that you've been an idiot for not seeing it sooner." The blunt assessment hit its mark with painful accuracy. Damien took a large gulp of wine and tried to focus on his plate, but his attention kept drifting back to Amara. She was telling Marcus something that required her to lean closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate level. Whatever she said made Marcus laugh and shake his head in apparent amazement. The easy intimacy of the exchange made Damien's jaw clench with jealousy. As if sensing his attention, Amara glanced down the table. Their eyes met for just a moment and something passed between them. Surprise, perhaps, at the intensity of his gaze. She tilted her head slightly, a small frown creasing her brow, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then Marcus said something that reclaimed her attention, and the moment was broken. But Damien was left with the unsettling certainty that she had seen something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Something that changed the fundamental nature of everything between them. The evening wound down around 11 p.m., with executives gradually drifting toward their rooms or gathering in small groups for nightcaps. Damien found himself alone on the main terrace, nursing a glass of whiskey and trying to make sense of the emotional chaos that had become his evening. Tomorrow they would return to San Francisco. In 2 weeks, Amara would start her new position. The careful professional distance that had defined their relationship would be replaced by, what? Polite exchanges in hallways, formal interactions during meetings. The thought of losing even that limited connection to her was unbearable. Couldn't sleep either. Amara's voice came from behind him, soft and unexpected. He turned to find her standing in the doorway, still in her midnight blue dress, but with her hair now completely down, falling in waves around her shoulders. "Something like that," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. She stepped onto the terrace, moving to the railing a few feet away from him. The night air carried the scent of her perfume, something subtle and warm that made his pulse quicken. "It's been a good retreat," she said, looking out over the moonlit vineyards. "I think everyone feels positive about the quarterly projections." "Yes, you did excellent work organizing everything." "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, but it was a different kind of silence than they had shared before, charged with unspoken words and shifting dynamics. "Damien," she said finally, using his first name for the first time he could remember. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Earlier, at dinner, you seemed different, distracted." She turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Is everything all right?" The question was simple, concerned, the kind of thoughtful inquiry that someone who had worked closely with him for 18 months might naturally ask. But the way she asked it, with genuine care, as if his well-being actually mattered to her, nearly undid him completely. "Everything's fine," he lied. Amara studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her processing his response, weighing it against whatever she had observed. "You know," she said slowly, "in 18 months of working together, you've never once asked me a personal question. Not about my background, my goals, my life outside the office. Nothing." The observation was delivered without accusation, but it hit him with devastating accuracy. "But tonight," she continued, "you've been watching me, really watching me, like you're seeing me for the first time." Damien felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "Maybe I am." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Amara's eyes widened slightly as if she hadn't expected him to answer so directly. "What changed?" she asked quietly. "Everything," he wanted to say. "Everything changed when I saw you by that pool and realized that I've been blind for 18 months. Everything changed when I watched other men appreciate what I've been taking for granted. Everything changed when I finally understood that losing you would be the biggest mistake of my professional life." But what he said was, "I don't know." Amara nodded slowly, as if his non-answer was actually quite revealing. "Well," she said, moving toward the door, "whatever it is, I hope you figure it out." As she reached the threshold, she paused and looked back at him. "Good night, Damien." And for the first time, his name in her voice sounded like a promise rather than a formality. The hardest truths are the ones that force you to confront who you really are. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a San Francisco autumn, but nothing about the 32nd floor of Domus Tech felt the same to Damien Royce. He sat in his corner office, ostensibly reviewing quarterly reports, but his attention kept drifting to the woman at the desk outside his door. Amara had returned from the retreat with a subtle but unmistakable transformation. She still performed her duties with flawless precision, still anticipated his needs before he voiced them, still maintained the professional courtesy that had defined their working relationship. But something fundamental had shifted in her energy. She no longer looked away when their eyes met. She no longer softened her responses with unnecessary politeness. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already moved on, even though she was still physically present. In 8 days she would be gone. The thought made Damien's chest tight with something that felt suspiciously like panic. "Mr. Royce?" Amara's voice came through the intercom, crisp and professional. "Ms. Chang is here to discuss transition protocols." Damien closed his eyes briefly. Of course, Vivian would want to establish timelines for training Amara's replacement, for transferring institutional knowledge, for ensuring seamless continuity of operations. All the practical details of losing the best assistant he'd ever had. "Send her in." Vivian entered with her characteristic warmth, but her expression was more serious than usual. She settled into the chair across from his desk with the careful posture of someone about to deliver news that might not be well received. "I wanted to update you on Amara's transition timeline," she began without preamble. "She's been incredibly thorough in documenting her processes and responsibilities. I think we can manage a smooth handover." "Good," Damien replied, though the word felt hollow. "I also wanted to discuss replacement candidates." We've identified 3 strong possibilities, all with excellent credentials and experience supporting C-level executives. Vivian opened her tablet and began scrolling through profiles, but Damien found himself only half listening. Through his office window, he could see Amara fielding phone calls with her usual grace, taking notes in her precise handwriting, managing the controlled chaos of corporate life with an efficiency that made it look effortless. "This is Janet Morrison," Vivian was saying, turning her tablet toward him. 7 years of executive assistant experience, excellent references, very detail-oriented. The woman on the screen was attractive, professional, competent-looking, everything an executive assistant should be, but she wasn't Amara, and the thought of working with someone else, of building a new professional relationship from scratch, felt exhausting. "They all look qualified," Damien said diplomatically. "Yes, but I wanted your input on scheduling interviews. We should move quickly to ensure adequate training time before Amara transitions to communications." The casual mention of Amara's new role hit him like a physical blow. In 8 days, she would be working 2 floors down, reporting to Marcus Sterling, building strategic communication plans instead of managing his coffee preferences. The thought of Marcus as Amara's new supervisor made Damien's jaw clench with barely controlled jealousy. "Schedule whatever you think is appropriate," he said, his voice more clipped than he intended. Vivian gave him a searching look. "Damien, is everything all right? You seem distracted." Before he could answer, a soft knock interrupted them. Amara appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, looking apologetic for the interruption. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Morrison is online too. He says it's urgent regarding the environmental compliance timeline." "Take a message," Damien replied automatically. "I tried, but he's insisting on speaking with you directly. Something about a potential delay that could affect the Q4 launch schedule." Damien felt the familiar weight of crisis management settling on his shoulders. The Morrison project was worth $12 million and 6 months of strategic planning. If there were compliance issues, "Put him through," he said, reaching for his phone. As Amara turned to leave, Vivian called after her. "Amara, before you go, we should schedule time this week to review the communication coordinator onboarding materials." "Of course. I'm free Thursday afternoon after the Henderson client meeting." "Perfect. I'm excited to have you on the team officially." Amara smiled, a genuine expression of pleasure that made her entire face light up. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to the new challenges." As she left to transfer the call, Damien found himself staring after her, struck by the enthusiasm in her voice when she talked about her new position. When had she ever sounded that excited about anything related to working for him? The answer was simple: never. "Damien," Vivian's voice cut through his distraction. "Morrison's holding." The call with Morrison turned into a 45-minute crisis management session involving environmental lawyers, compliance specialists, and enough regulatory jargon to make Damien's head pound. By the time he hung up, it was nearly noon, and the office had settled into its usual midday rhythm. But something was different about the energy outside his door. Through his office window, Damien could see Amara at her desk, but she wasn't alone. Marcus Sterling was leaning against her workstation, coffee cup in hand, clearly in no hurry to return to his own department. They were deep in conversation, Amara's face animated as she gestured at something on her computer screen. Marcus said something that made her laugh, that musical sound that had been haunting Damien's thoughts since the retreat. In response, Marcus leaned closer, his hand briefly touching her shoulder in a gesture that was casual but unmistakably intimate. The sight hit Damien like a physical blow. He stood up abruptly, driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand, and walked toward his door. "Ms. Dixon," he called, his voice carrying across the open office space. "Could I see you for a moment?" Both Amara and Marcus looked up, surprise flickering across their faces. Marcus straightened, stepping back from Amara's desk with the careful politeness of someone who had been caught in a potentially compromising position. "Of course, Mr. Royce," Amara replied, her professional mask sliding smoothly into place. Marcus nodded to both of them. "I should get back to my department anyway. Amara, we'll continue this conversation later." The casual use of her first name, the promise of continued contact, it all made Damien's teeth clench with barely controlled irritation. Amara followed him into his office, closing the door behind her with practiced efficiency. But instead of taking her usual seat, she remained standing, tablet in hand, waiting for whatever crisis required his immediate attention. What did Marcus want? The question came out more sharply than Damien had intended. Amara's eyebrows rose slightly. He was discussing the transition timeline for the communications role, Since I'll be reporting to him next week, he wanted to review upcoming projects and priorities. Of course, professional consultation between future colleagues. Perfectly reasonable, completely appropriate. So why did it feel like Marcus was poaching something that belonged to him? I see, Damien said, moving to his window to avoid looking directly at her. And you're comfortable with that reporting structure? Very comfortable. Marcus has an excellent reputation, and the communications department has been doing innovative work under his leadership. The enthusiasm in her voice when she talked about Marcus made something dark twist in Damien's chest. When had she ever spoken about working for him with that kind of excitement? Right, he said, turning back to face her. Well, I just wanted to remind you that until next Friday, you're still my assistant. I'd appreciate it if personal conversations with other department heads could be kept to a minimum during business hours. The words came out colder and more controlling than he had intended, and the effect on Amara was immediate. Her expression shifted from professional courtesy to something sharper, more challenging. Personal conversations, she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. You know what I mean. No, actually I don't. Amara set her tablet down on his desk with deliberate precision. Marcus Sterling is discussing work-related matters with his incoming team member. That's called professional consultation, not personal conversation. He had his hand on your shoulder. The observation slipped out before Damien could stop it, and the moment the words left his mouth, he knew he had made a terrible mistake. Amara's eyes flashed with something that looked like anger, but when she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. I'm sorry, are you monitoring my physical interactions with colleagues now? That's not what I meant. Because if you are, I should probably mention that Harrison Webb shook my hand for an inappropriately long time after the retreat, and Patricia Kellaway hugged me when she heard about my promotion. Should I file reports on all physical contact for your review? The sarcasm in her voice was razor-sharp, and Damien realized he was rapidly losing control of this conversation. But something about her defiance, her refusal to be intimidated by his authority, only made his feelings more intense. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Really? How is it different? Because Marcus Sterling wants you, Damien thought desperately. Because I saw the way he looked at you at the retreat, and I know what that look means. Because the thought of him having daily access to you, of him appreciating your intelligence and your strength and your beautiful laugh, makes me want to put my fist through a wall. But what he said was, "It just is." Amara stared at him for a long moment, and Damien could see her processing his response, weighing it against everything else that had passed between them in recent weeks. You know what, Damien, she said finally, using his first name with deliberate emphasis. You're right. This conversation is inappropriate, but not for the reasons you think. She picked up her tablet and moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. For 18 months I've been invisible to you, a piece of office equipment that happened to have a pulse. You never cared who I talked to, who I laughed with, who I was as a person beyond my ability to manage your schedule. Her voice was quiet, but every word hit him like a physical blow. But now suddenly you're concerned about my professional interactions? Now you want to monitor my conversations and police my relationships? She shook her head. That's not professionalism, Damien. That's possession. And you lost the right to possess any part of my life the moment you made me feel like I was nothing. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Damien alone with the devastating accuracy of her words. For the first time in his life, he had been called out for behavior that was completely indefensible, and the woman who had just destroyed him with the truth was walking away from him forever, unless he found the courage to stop her. Sometimes the only way to save something precious is to risk losing everything else. For 3 days, Damien Royce existed in a state of barely controlled desperation. He watched Amara move through her final week with professional grace, tying up loose ends, training her temporary replacement, preparing for her transition to the communications department. She was polite, efficient, and completely unreachable. She no longer met his eyes unless absolutely necessary. Her responses to his requests were correct, but minimal. The easy warmth that had once softened their professional interactions had vanished entirely, replaced by the cool politeness reserved for difficult clients. He had lost her completely, and he had no one to blame but himself. Thursday afternoon brought the final straw. Damien emerged from a budget meeting to find Amara's desk empty, her computer locked, her personal items already packed into a small cardboard box. For one terrifying moment, he thought she had already left. Then he heard her laugh, that musical sound that had become both a comfort and a torment, coming from the break room. Through the glass door, he could see her with Janet Morrison, the woman Vivian had selected as her replacement. They were reviewing procedures, Amara's hands gesturing gracefully as she explained some complex system that kept his professional life running smoothly. But what made Damien's chest tighten with something that felt like grief was the ease between them. Amara was training Janet with the same care and attention she brought to everything else, ensuring that her departure would cause minimal disruption. Even in leaving, she was taking care of him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. For 18 months, Amara Dixon had been quietly, competently, lovingly making his life better, and his response had been to take her for granted, dismiss her worth, and finally attempt to control her when he realized what he was losing. He was, as Claudia Reeves had so bluntly pointed out, an idiot. That evening, Damien sat alone in his Nob Hill penthouse, nursing a glass of single malt whiskey and staring out at the city lights below. The apartment was a monument to his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, artwork worth more than most people's annual salaries. But tonight it felt empty, sterile, as meaningless as everything else in his carefully constructed life. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Haven't heard from you in 2 weeks, everything all right?" Damien stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Not really, can I call you?" "Of course, sweetheart, always." Margaret Royce answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the warm concern that had been his anchor through childhood disappointments and adult crises. "Damien, what's wrong?" For a moment he couldn't speak. How could he explain that he had fallen in love with a woman he had spent 18 months treating as office furniture? How could he admit that his professional success had made him arrogant enough to believe that competence and authority were substitutes for basic human decency? "I think I've made a terrible mistake, Mom. Work or personal? Both. The same thing, actually." Margaret was quiet for a moment, and Damien could picture her settling into her favorite chair in the Berkeley Hills home, where she had raised him as a single mother, working 2 jobs to put him through private school. "Tell me," she said simply. So he did. Haltingly, with long pauses and painful admissions, Damien told his mother about Amara Dixon, about 18 months of professional efficiency that he had mistaken for personal invisibility, about a brilliant, beautiful, accomplished woman who had managed his life with grace while he remained oblivious to her worth, about a weekend retreat that had shattered his assumptions, and a conversation that had revealed the depth of his selfishness. When he finished, Margaret was quiet for so long that Damien wondered if the call had dropped. "Mum, I'm here. I'm just processing." Her voice carried a disappointment that cut deeper than any anger could have. "Damien, I raised you better than this. I know. Do you? Because what you're describing, they're treating another human being as if they were invisible, dismissing their worth, taking their dedication for granted, that's not the man I thought I had raised." Each word was a knife to his chest, made worse by the fact that they were completely accurate. "You're right," he said quietly. I don't know what I've been. Arrogant, blind, cruel maybe. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. She leaves tomorrow. She won't even look at me, and I can't blame her. Damien. Margaret's voice shifted to the tone she had used when he was 12, and convinced that failing a math test meant the end of the world. "Let me ask you something. Do you love this woman?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Damien closed his eyes, thinking about Amara's smile when she thought no one was watching. Her quiet competence in crisis situations, the way she had stood up to him in his office, demanding the respect she deserved, the grace with which she moved through the world, even when that world included people who failed to see her value. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I do." "Then you fight for her, not as her boss, not as someone who's used to getting what he wants through authority or money. You fight for her as a man who finally understands what he's about to lose. What if it's too late? It's only too late if you give up without trying." After hanging up, Damien sat in his empty apartment, his mother's words echoing in his mind. Fight for her, not as her boss, but as a man. For the first time in his adult life, Damien Royce was going to have to risk genuine vulnerability. He was going to have to admit that he had been wrong, not just professionally, but fundamentally, as a human being. And he was going to have to do it without any guarantee that Amara would listen, much less forgive him. Friday morning arrived grey and drizzly, the kind of San Francisco weather that matched Damien's mood perfectly. He had barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing conversations that he might never have the courage to initiate. Amara's last day. She arrived at her usual time, looking beautiful in a charcoal suit that he had seen dozens of times, but somehow seemed different today. Final. She moved through her morning routine with the same efficiency she had always shown, but there was an underlying energy of completion, of a woman preparing to close one chapter of her life and begin another. At 10 a.m., flowers arrived, a massive arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus, elegant and expensive. Damien watched through his office window as Amara signed for the delivery, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure as she read the card. The flowers were from Marcus Sterling, welcoming her to the communications team. The sight made Damien's chest tight with something that felt like panic. Marcus was already marking his territory, already making Amara feel valued and appreciated in ways that Damien had failed to do for 18 months. By noon, a steady stream of colleagues had stopped by Amara's desk to say goodbye. Each conversation was brief but warm, filled with genuine affection and respect. Watching from his office, Damien realized that Amara had built real relationships throughout the company. Not just professional courtesy, but actual friendships. How had he never noticed? At 3 p.m., Vivian Chang appeared with a small group from HR, presenting Amara with a farewell cake and a gift, a beautiful leather portfolio embossed with her initials. The gathering was intimate, filled with laughter and well wishes. Damien was not invited. The message was clear. Amara Dixon was beloved by her colleagues, respected by leadership and moving on to better things. And he was the one person in the building who had failed to recognize her worth until it was too late. At 4:30, Janet Morrison arrived for the final transition meeting. Damien watched through his window as Amara walked her through systems and procedures with infinite patience, ensuring that every detail was covered, professional to the end. At 5 p.m., Amara began packing her personal items into the small cardboard box she had prepared earlier, a framed photo of what looked like her family, a small succulent plant that she watered religiously every Tuesday, a coffee mug that read, "Nevertheless, she persisted," in elegant script, evidence of a life, a personality, a whole person that he had somehow managed to overlook for 18 months. At 5:15, she knocked on his doorframe. "Mr. Royce? I'm ready for our final checkout meeting." Her voice was polite, professional, completely impersonal. She stood in his doorway holding her tablet and the cardboard box, waiting for him to acknowledge the end of their working relationship. For a moment, Damien couldn't speak. This was it. After this conversation, Amara Dixon would walk out of his office and his life, moving on to opportunities that he had been too blind to offer her himself. "Come in," he managed. "Close the door." She hesitated for just a moment, then set down her box and did as he asked. But instead of taking her usual seat, she remained standing, maintaining physical distance that mirrored the emotional distance he had created between them. "I've prepared a comprehensive transition document," she began, consulting her tablet. "All ongoing projects are documented with status updates and next steps. Your calendar is current through the end of the month, and I've briefed Janet on your preferences for scheduling and communication." "Amara," her name came out rougher than he intended. "Stop." She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "Just stop, please." For a long moment they stared at each other across the expanse of his office. All the careful professional distance that had defined their relationship seemed to collapse, leaving them as just two people who had somehow failed to really see each other until it was too late. "I need to say something," Damien said quietly, "and I need you to listen, not as my assistant, not as someone who works for me, but as Amara." She studied his face, and he could see her weighing his request against 18 months of professional disappointment. Finally, she nodded. "I'm listening. The most powerful words are the ones that cost you everything to say." Damien stood behind his desk, his hands trembling slightly, as he faced the woman who had somehow become the most important person in his world. Amara waited, her dark eyes watchful, her posture guarded but attentive. The evening light streaming through his office windows cast shadows across her face, making her expression difficult to read. For 18 months, he had been the one with power in this room, the one who gave orders, made decisions, controlled the dynamic between them. But now, with everything on the line, Damien Royce felt more vulnerable than he had ever been in his life. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "About possession, about how I lost the right to have any claim on your life." Amara's expression didn't change, but he saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or caution. "You were right," he continued, "about all of it. I did treat you as if you were invisible. For 18 months I had the most remarkable woman I've ever met working 10 feet away from me, And I was too arrogant, too self-absorbed, too... He paused, searching for the right word. Too stupid to see you. Damien, please let me finish, because if I don't say this now, I'll never have the courage again. He moved around his desk, eliminating the physical barrier between them, though he was careful to maintain respectful distance. When he spoke again, his voice carried a rawness that she had never heard before. 3 weeks ago, if someone had asked me to describe you, I would have said you were efficient, reliable, professional, and I would have thought that was a complete assessment. His laugh was hollow, self-deprecating. But that weekend at the retreat, when I saw you by the pool, it wasn't just that you were beautiful, though God knows you took my breath away. It was that I realized I had been working beside a complete stranger. Amara's hands tightened around her tablet, but she remained silent. So I started paying attention, really paying attention for the first time. And what I saw, Damien ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find words for feelings he had never had to articulate. I saw a woman who speaks 3 languages, who has an MBA from Berkeley, who could probably run this company better than I do. I saw someone who remembers the birthdays of every person on this floor, who waters that little plant on her desk every Tuesday like clockwork, who always knows exactly what needs to be done before anyone asks. His voice grew softer, more intimate. I saw someone who has been taking care of me, not just my schedule or my correspondence, but me, for 18 months. Making my coffee exactly how I like it, managing crises before they reached my desk, protecting my time and my energy and my sanity. And I never once said thank you. Not really. Amara's professional mask was beginning to crack, and Damien could see emotions playing across her face. Surprise, pain, something that might have been hope. But the worst part, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, was realizing that while I was being blind to everything you are, other people weren't. Marcus Sterling sees your worth. Harrison Webb appreciates your intelligence. Patricia Kellaway recognizes your potential. Hell, even my mother, who's never met you, understood what I was losing after one phone conversation. You talked to your mother about me? It was the first time she had spoken since he began, and the question came out softer than her usual professional tone. I called her last night because I was falling apart, and I needed someone to help me understand how I had become the kind of man who could be cruel to the woman who... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Who what? Amara asked quietly. Damien looked directly into her eyes, and everything he had been trying to say crystallized into one devastating truth. The woman I love. The words hung between them like a bridge over an impossible chasm. Amara's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly in shock. For a moment neither of them moved, neither of them breathed. You love me, she whispered. I am desperately, completely, hopelessly in love with you, Damien said, his voice gaining strength as he finally spoke the truth aloud. And I know I have no right to feel that way. I know I've forfeited any claim to your affection through 18 months of taking you for granted. I know that telling you this now, when you're about to start a new chapter of your life, is probably selfish and unfair. He took a small step closer, and she didn't retreat. But I couldn't let you walk out of here without knowing that someone sees you, really sees you. Your intelligence, your grace, your strength, your kindness, your beautiful laugh that I never appreciated until I thought I might never hear it again. The way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. The way you always know exactly what I need before I know it myself. Tears were gathering in Amara's eyes, though she was fighting to maintain composure. I see the woman who could have reported me to HR for that comment about distractions, but instead chose to handle it with dignity. I see the woman who trained her replacement with the same care she brought to everything else, even though I had given her every reason to make my transition difficult. I see the woman who is gracious enough to listen to this probably too late confession, instead of walking out the door like I deserve. Damien's voice broke slightly on the last words. I love you, Amara, and I know it's too late. I know I lost you through my own blindness and arrogance, but I needed you to know that when you leave here tonight, you're not invisible. You never were. You were the most important person in my world, and I was just too much of a fool to realize it. The silence that followed was deafening. Amara stood frozen, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, her tablet forgotten in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Do you know what the worst part was? She asked. It wasn't the comment about distractions, though that hurt more than you can imagine. It wasn't being treated like office furniture for 18 months, though that was devastating too. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the pain and hope warring in her eyes. The worst part was that I had feelings for you, real feelings, and I convinced myself that if I just worked harder, if I just proved my worth professionally, maybe someday you would see me as more than your assistant. Damien felt his heart stop. Amara, I stayed in this job for 18 months, not because I lacked ambition or options, but because I was in love with a man who barely knew I existed. And every day I told myself that tomorrow might be the day you would really look at me and see me. God, Amara, I'm so sorry. I'm not finished. Her voice was stronger now, more controlled. When I applied for the communications position, it wasn't just about career advancement. It was about saving myself. Because I knew that if I stayed here, if I kept loving someone who would never love me back, it would destroy me eventually. Damien felt tears gathering in his own eyes. And now? Amara studied his face for a long moment, as if she was trying to memorize every detail. Now you're telling me that you love me. After 18 months of being invisible, after I've already accepted another position, after I've already started building a life that doesn't revolve around managing your calendar and anticipating your needs, she shook her head. The timing is terrible, Damien finished. I know the timing is terrible, and I know I have no right to ask this, but what? He took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage he possessed. But if there's any part of you that still feels what you just described, if there's any chance that we could try to build something real together, something based on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than professional hierarchy, I would spend the rest of my life proving that I see you, all of you, and that I will never ever take you for granted again. The office fell silent, except for the sound of their breathing and the distant hum of traffic 32 floors below. Amara stared at him, her emotions clearly warring across her face. Finally, she set down her tablet and stepped close enough to reach up and touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. You broke my heart, Damien Royce, she said softly. For 18 months you broke my heart a little more each day. I know, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But, she paused, her thumb brushing away a tear he didn't realize had fallen. But I never stopped hoping that someday, somehow, you would see me the way I saw you. And now? Amara smiled through her tears, the first genuine smile she had given him since the retreat. Now I need you to prove it, not with words, but with actions. Not as my boss, but as a man who claims to love me. I need you to court me, to pursue me, to show me every single day that I matter to you as more than someone who manages your life. Yes, Damien said immediately. Yes, anything, everything. I'm taking the communications position, she continued firmly. I've worked too hard for this opportunity to give it up, even for love. But if you're serious about this, about us, then you'll support my career instead of trying to control it. Of course, absolutely. And you'll have to be patient with me, because trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. I have all the time in the world. Amara studied his face one more time, then stepped back slightly. Then ask me, she said quietly. Ask you what? Ask me properly, not as my boss requesting a favor, but as a man asking a woman he loves for a chance. Damien's heart raced as he understood what she was offering. A chance. A real chance. He got down on one knee, not in proposal, but in supplication, looking up at her with every wall he had ever built completely demolished. Amara Dixon, he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, would you give me the honor, the privilege, the gift of letting me love you the way you deserve to be loved? She looked down at him, this powerful man, humbling himself before her, and smiled the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. Yes, Damien Royce, but you're going to have to work for it. He stood up slowly, and when she didn't step away, he reached up to cradle her face in his hands. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, she whispered back, finally. And when he kissed her, 18 months of blindness and heartbreak and misunderstanding melted away, replaced by the promise of something real, something equal, something beautiful, something worth fighting for. 6 months later, sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments when love finally learns to see clearly. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Domus Tech's executive conference room, casting golden light across the polished table where 30 department heads had gathered for the quarterly review. At the head of the table, Damien Royce presented the company's strongest financial performance in 5 years, his voice confident and commanding as he outlined expansion plans and strategic initiatives. But every few minutes his gaze would drift to the woman seated 3 chairs down on his left. Amara Dixon, now Communications Director Amara Dixon, sat with her tablet and notes spread before her, occasionally interjecting with insights about market positioning or brand strategy that made the entire room lean forward with attention. In 6 months, she had transformed the company's public image, streamlined their messaging, and earned the respect of every executive at the table. She wore a burgundy blazer that brought out the warmth in her skin, her hair styled in loose waves that fell just past her shoulders. Professional, elegant, absolutely radiant. But what made Damien's chest tight with pride wasn't her appearance. It was watching her command the room with the same quiet strength that had once managed his chaotic schedule. The difference was that now everyone could see it. The brand recognition metrics are particularly impressive, Patricia Kellaway was saying, consulting her tablet. The consumer awareness campaign exceeded projections by 30%. Excellent work, Amara. Thank you. The entire communications team deserves credit for the execution. Amara's response was gracious, confident. We've been able to leverage authentic storytelling to connect with younger demographics while maintaining trust with our established customer base. Damien found himself smiling as she spoke, not just at her professional competence, but at the ease with which she inhabited this role. Gone was the woman who had once made herself invisible in corporate settings. In her place was someone who belonged at this table, whose voice added value to every conversation. After the meeting concluded, executives filed out in small groups, their conversations continuing in the hallway. Damien lingered at the conference table, ostensibly reviewing his notes but actually waiting for the room to empty. Amara was the last to pack up her materials, moving with the same methodical precision she had always possessed. When she looked up to find him watching her, she raised an eyebrow with amused curiosity. "What?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Nothing. Just—" He gestured vaguely at the space around them. "You were incredible in there." "I was doing my job." "No, you were doing much more than your job. You were leading." He stood up, moving closer to her side of the table. "Patricia hung on your every word. Marcus looked like he wanted to take notes on your presentation style, and Harrison actually admitted that one of your ideas was better than his original concept." Amara laughed, the sound as musical now as it had been that first day he really noticed her. Harrison Webb, admitting someone else had a good idea? That is noteworthy. "I'm proud of you," Damien said quietly. "Not proud of you like a boss praising an employee, but proud of you like someone who loves you and wants to see you shine." The distinction was important, and they both knew it. 6 months of rebuilding their relationship had required constant navigation of the boundary between personal and professional, between support and control, between partnership and hierarchy. "Thank you," Amara replied, her voice soft with genuine emotion. "That means everything." Before Damien could respond, the conference room door opened and Marcus Sterling appeared, his expression bright with the satisfaction of a successful meeting. "Amara, excellent work on the Q4 campaign analysis. I'd like to discuss expanding that approach to the Henderson project timeline." He glanced at Damien with professional courtesy. "I hope you don't mind if I steal your girlfriend for a few minutes. Business calls." The casual reference to their relationship, which was now acknowledged throughout the company, made Amara smile. 6 months ago, the idea of Damien Royce dating anyone would have been corporate gossip for weeks. But their relationship had evolved so naturally, with such obvious mutual respect and affection, that it had simply become accepted fact. "She's all yours," Damien replied with a grin. "I'll see you tonight for dinner?" 7:30, Amara confirmed, gathering her materials. "Don't be late. Keisha will never forgive you if you make us miss our reservation again." As she walked toward the door with Marcus, Damien called after her. "Amara?" She turned back, eyebrows raised in question. "I love you." The declaration, spoken casually in a corporate conference room in front of her supervisor, would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. But now it was simply truth, acknowledged and celebrated rather than hidden. "I love you too," she replied with a smile that could have powered the entire building. After they left, Damien stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by the evidence of another successful quarterly review. But what filled him with satisfaction wasn't the financial projections or the strategic initiatives. It was the memory of Amara's voice, commanding attention and respect from some of the most successful executives in the technology industry. It was the knowledge that she had built this career, not because he had given her opportunities, but because she had earned them through her own brilliance and determination. It was the certainty that loving Amara Dixon had made him not just a better man, but a better leader, a better partner, a better human being. That evening, Damien sat across from Amara at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, watching her laugh at something Keisha had said about her latest dating disaster. The three of them had become unlikely friends, bonded by Keisha's protective instincts and Damien's genuine desire to understand the people who mattered to Amara. "I still can't believe you convinced him to get down on one knee in his own office," Keisha was saying, gesturing with her wine glass. "Girl, you had that man completely whipped by the end." "I didn't convince him to do anything," Amara protested, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. "He chose to humble himself." "Best decision I ever made," Damien added, reaching across the table to take Amara's hand, though technically it wasn't a proposal, just a very dramatic request for a second chance. "Speaking of proposals," Keisha's eyes glittered with mischief. "Any updates on that front?" Amara and Damien exchanged a look, the kind of silent communication that had developed between them over months of learning to truly see each other. "We're taking our time," Amara said diplomatically. "Building something real takes patience. Building something real takes trust," Damien corrected gently, "and trust takes time to rebuild once it's been broken." The acknowledgement of their complicated history was matter-of-fact rather than painful. They had both learned to speak honestly about the mistakes that had nearly cost them everything, using that honesty as foundation for something stronger. "Besides," Amara continued with a smile that made Damien's heart skip, "some things are worth waiting for." As the evening wound down and they said goodbye to Keisha, Damien and Amara walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of North Beach. The city lights reflected off the bay in the distance, creating a backdrop of glittering possibility. "Do you ever think about it?" Damien asked as they strolled. "What would have happened if you hadn't applied for that promotion? If I had never seen you at the pool that weekend?" Amara was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember something my grandmother used to say, 'Love will find a way, but only if you're brave enough to let it.' Were you brave?" "I was desperate," she laughed. "But maybe that's the same thing sometimes." They stopped walking, finding themselves in front of a small park overlooking the bay. The bench where they sat was the same one where they had shared their first real conversation as equals, rather than boss and employee, 6 months and a lifetime ago. "I need to tell you something," Damien said, his voice more serious than usual. Amara turned to face him, alert to the shift in his tone. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about my mother's advice, about fighting for you not as someone who's used to getting what he wants through authority or money, but as a man who understands what he almost lost." "And?" Damien reached into his jacket pocket, his hand closing around a small velvet box that had been waiting for the right moment for 3 weeks. "And I realized that I spent 18 months not seeing you, 6 months learning to love you properly, and I don't want to spend another day without asking you to be my partner in everything." Amara's eyes widened as he got down on one knee for the second time, but this time it wasn't supplication, it was celebration. "Amara Dixon," he said, opening the box to reveal a vintage Art Deco ring that was elegant and unique, just like her. "You taught me how to see. You taught me how to love. You taught me that the most valuable things in life are the ones you almost lose before you recognize their worth." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling so brightly that the city lights seemed dim in comparison. "Will you marry me? Not because I'm asking as your former boss, not because I think I deserve you, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another human being." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Damien Royce. Finally, completely, forever. Yes." When he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Amara felt the last pieces of 18 months of hurt and hope finally settle into place. This wasn't the fairy tale ending where the prince suddenly sees the princess. This was better. This was two imperfect people who had learned to see each other clearly, to love each other honestly, and to build something beautiful from the ruins of what they thought they knew about themselves. As they kissed under the San Francisco stars, Amara thought about the woman she had been 18 months ago, invisible, overlooked, quietly hoping for recognition that never came. And then she thought about the woman she was now, successful, loved, valued, for exactly who she had always been. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen not when you become someone new, but when you finally find someone who sees who you've always been. Have you ever loved someone who couldn't see your worth? What would you do if the person who broke your heart came back asking for a second chance? Would you risk everything for love, or would you protect yourself and walk away? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.